Hey, welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast. Today we'll look back at the election with Jamie Miller, former executive director of the Florida Republican Party and veteran of the 2000 George Bush campaign and the subsequent recount. Jamie's the author of America's Speeches That Changed History, which is available on Amazon, and he's a writer of Reasonable Arguments on Substack. Jamie, hey, thanks, pal, for being with us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
First, let's just start off. Give me a quickie analysis of why you think Trump ended up beating Kamala Harris.
And more numbers come out as more election data becomes available. We're 2 or 3 days removed from the election, and I think what happened I write a blog called Reasonable Arguments. It's right of center, you're left of center, and my belief is that Democrats went a little too far. I think that there's a cautionary tale in here for Trump as well. But I think what Americans said, when you look at the numbers where Trump increased his margins in every demographic except for two, people who were 65 plus and white college educated women, and every other single demographic, he increased his margin of victory, whether it was Hispanic or 18 to 30-year-old Hispanics or African Americans or 18 to 30-year-old African Americans, the Jewish populations. And he also increased his margin in 48 of 50 states. One of them that he didn't increase his margin was Utah, which is a pretty safe Republican state. And so I think what the American people were saying, and I always put on Facebook the day of an election morning, long before the results are known, is that we're very unique. We're the only people in the world who have the ability to tell our government and our people that we are stronger collectively than any one person, including if that person's president of the United States. And so when somebody starts to get too far off the reservation, we collectively can pull them back if we decide to join forces and join voices and do that. And I think that's what happened. Donald Trump won the election, but I also think that it was a rejection of how far left the Democratic Party had gone as a whole when it comes to border security or gender affirming care with tax dollars and boys playing in girls sports. And the last 2 weeks of the election, North Korea sent 10,000 troops to Ukraine on behalf of Russia, and nobody even hardly covered it. And so I think the big loser is not Democrats, but the big loser in the election is corporate media. And because they all sang from the same page and they covered the same things, there was very little autonomy between major news outlets. They covered the Real Clear Politics average, the Nate Silver Bulletin average. And while I lean on those folks for data all the time, when you start talking about averages, the very nature of an average is to bring things closer together and make them seem closer than they appear, right? I think Nate Silver's final average had Trump winning Pennsylvania by 0.3%. He ended up winning by 2.5. Silver can say, oh, I was within the margin of error. But the truth of the matter is the difference between 0.3 and 2.3 is significant. And those things were Nate Silver had Trump, his last forecast had Trump winning the race, but losing states like Michigan and Nevada, I think. And I predicted 2 weeks ago that Nevada was off the table by about 3 points. And that's, I think, about where the election results ended. I think the cautionary tale for Donald Trump and his team is that one of the things I think the American people rejected were these political prosecutions. And so some of the language Trump used going into, we all know there's a difference between beliefs and political rhetoric. We saw it from Biden and Harris calling Trump an existential threat to democracy. And then after the election saying we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power. So I think Americans are smart enough to separate that rhetoric. But when Donald Trump had said things with political rhetoric going into the campaign saying, I'm going to use the Department of Justice the way they used it against me, I think that would be the wrong move, just because I think part of what the American people said is quit using our tax dollars for your own political gain. And so I think there's a lot to unpack from the results. I think there's both Democrats and Republicans, I think, still need to do some soul searching and look in the mirror and really listen to what the American people were trying to say on Tuesday.
Okay, Jamie, I think that's a good start. That's a good analysis. And I agree with a bunch of what you said. I disagree with some things too. I said that the Democrats went too far. Seems to me that Trump went too far and his MAGA supporters went too far when they began talking about using the government to go after his political enemies, or I'll be a dictator on day one, that kind of thing. But
You and I think I like to use the term violent agreement. I think you and I
yeah,
are in violent agreement on that one.
okay. Now, Democrats pinned a lot of their hopes on the abortion issue, expecting strong support from women. I saw one columnist the other day that predicted that women would save the nation from Trump's autocracy. Well, it didn't really happen. The women didn't save the nation from Donald Trump. Why? What happened?
I think it came back to polling, right? I saw some polls going into the election where public polls that said that Harris was going to win women by 60-40, and she ended up winning by the more traditional 55-45. So she
Hmm.
didn't really grow that much, and
Yeah,
Trump didn't lose that much. He lost about 2% of college educated white women, which is one of the two groups he missed, but he only dropped 2 points in that group. And
yeah,
Harris needed him to drop 8 or 10 points in that group. And
yeah,
I think if you, and I don't have, this is conjecture on my part, but I think if you broke that college educated women crosstab
yeah,
into women with children and women without children, I think
yeah,
maybe Harris did win 60-40, 65-35 with college educated white women who don't have children. But I think Democrats ignored women who have children, and their kids are playing volleyball and they look across the net and there's a 6'1" boy playing in a girl's sport and spiking a ball on a 5'4" girl and injuring them. And so
mhm,
we've gotten to this point where those types of things, I think Americans said on Tuesday, like, how could you go that far? That is what you want to be normal. That's not normal. And it shouldn't be normal. And we're going to tell you with our vote that we don't want that normalized in our society.
okay. Now, older white men strongly supported Trump, and that was largely expected. But what about the young male voters, college age voters? They broke a trend of youth moving towards Democrats, right?
They sure did. I think this is my sons are in their 30s, and I tell them they basically had 3 years of a great American economy, and they were under Donald Trump. I know that Obama never had a recession, and he had this growth, economic growth. We're able to finagle, but it was never really a vibrant American economy. And Democrats forever said that was because of the economy Obama was given, but it really doesn't ring true when you have 8 years to change it. And Donald Trump came in and immediately cut regulations, increased energy policies, which helped people lower the gas prices and help people get to work cheaper, buy their food cheaper. And at the end of the day, I'm not an economist, but I call myself a blue collar economist.
Hmm.
If I've been in a blue collar job during my 20s working for an electric utility, and when gas went down, I got a raise, and it meant something because I had small children at home. And when the gas went down, a box of cereal became less expensive because it didn't cost as much to ship it. And I think that Democrats put these really crazy, not crazy ideals. I don't think they're crazy. I'll reel that back. But they put these ideals of environmentalism before the American people and the needs that they have today. I think a good example is electric vehicles. I think that's a disaster. And I think Americans are saying, listen, a lot of Americans are buying electric vehicles on their own, but we should have a choice of whether we want gas vehicles or electric. And for Democrats to say, oh, by 2032, all vehicles are going to be electric. I live in Florida. And if you're evacuating Miami, which if you're evacuating Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach, three counties about 90 miles apart from end to end, or 110 miles from end to end, one of the most diverse areas in the country. And those three counties make up the population of Maryland. right? In this densely populated area in Florida, we have the population of Maryland, and which is the 10th largest state in the union. And
Hmm.
you have a hurricane come, you're trying to evacuate Maryland. And so to put that in perspective, you can get to Disney World in Orlando before you need to recharge your electric battery when you're driving from Miami. It's a long way from Miami to Orlando. And there's not a way to recharge these batteries. They've come up with this idea of we'll bring trucks in with batteries and all like basically military things. So the the practical application is electric vehicles are great if you're going to work or going to the grocery store, but they're not great if we all have to get in them at the same time and go somewhere, like when you're evacuating for an emergency. And so I just don't think Democrats really thought that far ahead before implementing these policies to appeal to the very far left in the Democratic Party.
I just bought an electric vehicle about 6, 8 months ago.
How do you
Uh,
like it?
I absolutely love it.
Yeah,
But it is not a Tesla.
everybody I know who has one loves them. So I'm not bad mouthing electric vehicles. I'm just
Yeah,
bad mouthing
I
the
understand totally.
practical
I
application
understand
of
what you're.
government making us buy them all.
Hey, man, I understand what you're saying, especially that point about what would happen in Florida if you had to evacuate all these people at the same time and there's nowhere to charge. That would worry me too, which is one reason why I still have a gas vehicle parked in my garage that I can use if I need to.
Well, and
But
I'll tell
the,
you another thing. We just had the hurricanes here in Sarasota. The number of people who left a vehicle in their garage, electric vehicle in their garage,
yeah,
and the garage gets flooded, the electric vehicle caught on fire and burned the house to the ground
oh
during
my
these
God.
hurricanes. People aren't really talking about that when you
Wow.
get in these situations where they're abnormal, right? Like in a
Yeah,
normal day, they're great. But when you
yeah,
get in an abnormal situation, you're not going to drive that electric vehicle through puddles of water and or to evacuate if you wait too long. It's there.
yeah.
And I know of at least half a dozen or a dozen houses on Siesta Key alone that received, if not catastrophic fire damage, at least a lot of fire damage due to the electric vehicle that caught on fire in their garage.
Wow, wow, wow. That's not a good thing. When I asked you the question about young male voters, college age voters, I was really thinking you might talk a little bit about the Palestine situation, the war in Gaza with Israel, and the movement. There seems to be movement of younger voters uh, to oppose the position of Israel. What are your thoughts about that?
Like I said, I haven't broken down the data. I know
Yeah,
that Trump grew his margin of victory in those groups. I
yeah,
think most of those kids voted on a lot of Americans on the practical application of what the policies are when you start thinking. And I think on college campuses, it's probably more in students face the conflict over in Gaza on a day-to-day basis. But I think most of them ended up voting for the economy, just like a lot of
yeah.
other Americans.
I think you're probably right because when you think about it, these kids today, they're looking out at post-graduation and saying, "Am I going to be able to buy a home? How
Sure.
am I going to be able to buy a home when the average price is over 300K, which is what it is here in the area I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And this is supposed to be an inexpensive place to live. The they've got to be looking at that. They just have to. And so I understand that. I just do. And I think it's a tough situation that they're looking at. Now, if we let's go to the immigrant situation. He called immigrants trash and criminals and rapists and pledges mass deportations. And yet many Latino and Latinx voters supported him. Why?
I think that, in Florida, of course, we have a very diverse population. We have probably as diverse as any population in America. And, in Miami, we have ballot access. I think, it's electronic, but uh, technically, our ballot is written in, I think, 120, 130 languages down in Miami-Dade County. The rule here in Florida is if you have more than 10,000 people in a population who speak that language at home, that we provide them access to the ballot in that language. And so we have believe it or not, some of the most liberal laws on voting in America. But we also have a lot of legal immigrants here in Florida and who went through the process and love America. I tell everyone, I was like, if you want to feel like an American, go door to door in Little Havana, and there you'll run into not very many people who speak English as their first language. Some don't speak English hardly at all still,
Yeah.
and yet election day is like a festival. They embrace their freedom so much. And I went with our current Speaker of the House, or he's going to be the Speaker of the House, Danny Perez, for his campaign a few years ago. And it was one of the most patriotic things I've done in my life is go door to door in Little Havana, because door after door, you're talking to people who they themselves, if they were old enough, or their parents, were political prisoners in Cuba. And they would tell you these stories of how horrible it was and how hard it was to escape and how important our freedoms are. And I don't want to speak for them, but I've heard from them. So I think some of them have told me, some illegal immigrants have told me that they felt like illegal immigrants step on their freedom. And because they didn't go through the process and they're not coming, you have the Venezuelan gang example out in Colorado, whether that was overblown or not. The fact that is happening is legal immigrants feel the brunt of that because it unfairly reflects upon them. And so they feel like they are misrepresented by illegal immigrants. And so they want illegal immigration stopped just as much as almost every other demographic in America.
That makes sense. It really does. Now tell me this. What do you think should happen to the dreamers that Biden's been trying to help?
That's a tough question. There is some U.S. Supreme Court law about if your parents are here and they don't have allegiance to America. And for the most part, this is applied to ambassadors to the United Nations from different countries. So if you're an ambassador to the United Nations from Germany and you have a child here, your child's not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
Because you are in the United States with an allegiance to another country.
Right.
And so I don't know how you determine this word allegiance. I don't know that it's defined I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know how it's defined in law. But I think that at some level, we have to recognize that people who were born in America are Americans. And if we're going to dial that back, I think we should grasp on this word allegiance and try to have an honest discussion about, were your parents here? Did they come here? As I think like you, that the vast majority of these folks want to live the American dream. They're not here to be criminals. They're not here.
That's right.
They're not here to traffic children. They're here to live the American dream. And
That's right.
And I want to embrace that, right, as a fellow American, and I want to welcome people to America, but I want to do it in the right way.
Yeah.
When this administration lost 300,000 unaccompanied children who came across our border illegally, and they don't know where they are, and their own Department of Homeland Security said, number one, they're unaccounted for. They didn't show up to their court date, and we don't know where they are. We don't know if they're slaves. We don't know if they're being sex trafficked. We don't even know if they're alive. And that's a problem. The problem is we don't know who's come across that border. We know that some of them, because we've caught them in the act of criminal activity, we know that some of them are criminals. And so the fact is that because we've gone away from an organized immigration policy and just said, come one, come all, just run across the border. And if you make it, you're in. That's too chaotic for the American people. The American people are not against immigration, but I think they are also for some organized immigration of letting people in who want to live the American dream and will be an asset to our communities.
Okay. The reason I asked you the question about the Dreamers is because I have a little bit of a personal interest in that. I have a friend who I believe he's from Mexico. He worked in a Mexican restaurant here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He rose to be one of the managers of the restaurant. And then he and a couple of other of his friends, after he had saved his money, opened a new high-end Mexican restaurant here in Myrtle Beach that is just absolutely beautiful. And I am so proud of this guy. Now, he's a dreamer, and he's scared to death what might happen to him. And that is wrong. That is just wrong, my view.
Yeah, I'm not going to. I was quoted years ago saying, as this movement began long before Trump was president, of let's round folks up and send them home, right? And I was quoted in the Associated Press saying, I don't believe we are a country that's going to round people up, put them on trains and cross and send them across borders. I think that there should be some level of a pathway for people who are here and are dreamers, are living the American dream, have paid their taxes and have some level. And I don't know the exact way to do it, but I don't think that
No.
there's a practical application where Americans are going to live through and accept the visual of gathering up 1 million or 2 million people, or however many, 10 million, however many you want to claim there are, and quote, sending them home. I just don't, just like your story, it's personal. And sometimes we don't know the friends we have who are here and don't have status. And I look at some of these things not from the right or not from the left, but from a practical application standpoint. And I know that some people on the right don't like me when I do that, but I think from a practical application, there needs to be some level of, hey, if you've been here, and I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't know, because I think we have to figure out who came across the border over the last 4 years when it was just Katie barred the door, everybody just came across, and determine if people, I think that group probably is, we need to determine, but if they are criminals, or if they are gangs or drug traffickers or sex traffickers. And so, the real problem is we don't know, and it's going to be a tough thing. I don't know that the rhetoric of the campaign will match the actual actions of the administration. I don't speak for the administration. I'm not a surrogate for the Trump campaign. I'm just a guy who writes a blog and has a lot of political experience. So people like yourself trust that I'll come on and have, quote, a reasonable argument.
Yeah, that's what I do. I write a blog and I speak my piece and I interview people who have different points of view. And I love doing that. And I love the fact that you agreed to come on and talk about this after the election.
Thank you.
Now, so I think what you just said, though, is that you don't expect Trump to really try this mass deportation plan that he promised before the election, right?
I think you're going to see this for sure. You're going to see this apply to criminals very quickly. And if people are breaking laws that, there's a group of people who believe that, oh, you're here illegally, so you're automatically breaking the law because you're here illegally.
Right.
The very fact that you're here, you're breaking the law. But I think that I think it will start with people who are breaking laws that you and I would be considered as breaking the law, right? If you're robbing people, you're sex trafficking, you're a drug trafficker, you're committing murder, you're committing insurance fraud by short stopping your car and getting rear-ended. So, get a lawyer to then sue the insurance company for $30,000 to $50,000. And you do that 2 or 3 times a year. That's a great trick that people make a living on here in Florida. And,
really?
And so if you're doing those kind of, I think that's insurance fraud and is a criminal activity. If you're doing those types of things, you're going to get deported. And if you don't belong here, you're gonna do your time, and then you're gonna get deported. And I think the first thing is to stop people from illegally entering our country. That has to be first and foremost.
Right.
And I think you can look at Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis's example when people were wanting to flee Haiti to Florida during the gang uprisings there about 12 or 18 months ago. And he stood up and said, hey, listen, we're going to put our boats out there and you're not coming to Florida. So if you're getting in a boat, you better go to a state that's different than Florida, because we're going to turn you around and send you back to Haiti. We are going to do that as a state under our state's rights. And you know what? Nobody got in a boat and came here from Haiti. And
now they went to Youngstown, Ohio, where Vance said they ate cats and dogs.
And they may have, right? They may have flown to the United States, and they may have flown to someplace other than Florida. But the difference is that if the president of the United States stands up and says, you know what, You're no longer welcome at the southern border. We're going to close our border right now. Our southern border is closed. 90% of these folks stop. But then the only people who are coming across the border are cartels, drug traffickers, sex traffickers, who it's their business to be in the United States illegally. And so then we can say, here's the way we're going to allow people into the United States, and we're going to put people in line. And the people who are in line trying to do it right, just because there's 10 million people here illegally doesn't mean that the people who are trying to get in go back, they become 10 million and one. They don't go to the back of the line because you tried to do it right. And so now we have to look at the 10 or however many million who are here illegally and say, okay, how are we going to either deport them, tax them? You could tax them to death so that they leave, or you could there's a bunch of things you can do to say, listen, you need to go get in line to come into the United States. And so I think there will be a little bit of people saying, hey, I'm going to try to go through the process to become a legitimate U.S. citizen versus just living here illegally, because I think the past administration turned a blind eye, and this administration's not going to turn a blind eye, but I don't think you're going to see on day one cops from the Department of Justice rolling around neighborhoods, throwing people in police cars and deporting them.
Okay. Now I have to ask you this. Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen by Biden and the Democrats?
I answer that by saying Biden was the legitimate president of the United States. He was inaugurated, and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't like to look backward. I like to look forward. And I support free, fair, and transparent elections. And I think we still have a little ways to go to prove to the rest of the world and our children and grandchildren that there were some anomalies in 2020 that were not free, fair, and transparent. Whether it reached the level of fraud or whether it reached the level of tipping the scale towards Biden, I don't know that anyone will ever really know. And so I don't know that it's valuable if we're going to move forward, to discuss that. I think one thing I always advocate is let's live stream everywhere ballots are stored, delivered, cast, collected, counted, and canvassed. And it's no longer cost prohibitive to say, hey, we're not going to put a camera over your shoulder so we know how you vote, but we're going to put a camera in the precinct so we know who voted and how many people voted. And if there's fraud happening in the precinct after the polls close, that's not going to be able to happen anymore. And certainly the number of people who voted in 2024 gives credibility to those who think there were fraudulent votes cast in 2020, because there were 15 million more people cast votes. And it's not, there was an anomaly there. Now, I could argue that, especially in blue states, especially in swing states, that a lot of people were still cooped up from COVID. We did not have the vaccine yet. And so there were a lot of people who don't normally follow politics, who were sitting in their homes, working from home, and had the TV on. And what else is there to watch? They watched politics. So they got involved with that election. They voted, and then they didn't vote this time. So I think that's a possibility. But certainly when you start looking at the graphs and you see this many people voted in 12, this many people voted in 16, this many people voted in 20, this many people voted in 2024, it looks odd. And
why do you think?
I don't want to sit here and say that this is where fraud, during the 2000 election, there's a lot of ways that you can legally influence an election from a government standpoint. And in Florida, we've gone through great lengths to take that leniency away from government supervisor of elections. For instance, prior to 2000, a supervisor of elections in Florida, let's say you have a Republican precinct and you have what's seen as a close Republican race for county commission. The Democrat supervisor of elections could put that Republican race at the bottom of the page in a Republican precinct, so you get undervotes, but they put it at the top of the page in Democrat precincts, so every Democrat votes. And so you just tilt the scales just a little bit. That was, quite frankly, legal. And quite frankly, those types of shenanigans are still legal in many states today. And so, those types of things, we need to pass laws and say we want free, fair, and transparent elections. It's not fair to a candidate to have a different ballot placement in different precincts.
No,
And,
it's true.
and so there's plenty of, and so I hate this. I don't like to use the word fraud. I like to use the word influence.
Mm.
And when you had the governor of Pennsylvania break the law, and he did break the law in 2020, and the law of Pennsylvania is, and election law is determined by the legislature, and he broke the law and decided to mail in ballots to every single voter in Pennsylvania. And the court backed, a liberal court backed him up. The U.S. Supreme Court said, you know what, we're not going to take this case because it belongs in the states. And so you had a governor go against the laws of his state to influence the election. Was it fraudulent? The court said it wasn't. So I don't want to use that word, but was it wrong? You're damn right it was wrong.
Was it wrong to send? What's the matter with sending ballots to people so they can vote? I don't
The problem
understand what your
is, the
problem
problem
is.
is if you don't clean up your voter rolls, you're sending people on rolls who may not live there, who didn't request a ballot, may be dead. So if you're just sending a ballot to every, and people are, I don't want to say they're fraudulent, but you send a ballot to my house for, let's say my mother lived in my house and now she's deceased, and
Right.
now you just send me a ballot. Mom would have voted this way. Let me sign for mom and I'll send the ballot back. So once the
Okay.
ballots are there, there's a perfect example this election from a Michigan State University student. And it barely got reported. And I don't know that it should have, because an 18-year-old Chinese student who was here on a visa, not an American citizen, took his Michigan State University ID down, registered to vote, and voted. And he was proud to vote. And he
Right.
came back to his dormitory and he told his American friends out of pride, hey, I just voted in the election.
Yeah.
And they're like, you broke the law. You're not allowed to vote in our election because you're not a US citizen. So
Yeah.
the guy, out of guilt, goes down to the precinct and says, hey, I want my ballot back because I think I broke the law. A poll watcher there then calls the police saying, there's a guy down here saying he admitted that he cast a fraudulent ballot. And this is the important part of this conversation. And this is the problem, is once an illegal ballot is cast, it becomes a legal vote. And we
Okay.
as Americans are never going to take a legal vote out of the pile. And so they arrested the kid. I think they realized that he made a mistake. He wasn't trying to be fraudulent.
Right.
So I'm sure he's going to get a slap on the wrist. The point here is that they looked at him and said, because you have a secret ballot, we don't know which one's yours. So your
Okay.
illegal ballot became a vote. And so it's the one crime, if people commit it, that if you get away with it, the evidence is erased because it's
Okay.
become a legal vote. And so
Okay.
we need to do everything we can to ensure that only people who are citizens, only people who are registered to vote, vote. And the Pennsylvania governor in 2020 broke that confidence with the people of Pennsylvania.
Okay. All right. I want to switch to the January 6th, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Should those people be pardoned?
I think that the Department of Justice has done a fairly good job of looking at who went there to be violent and who was not. And the number of people who went there to be violent is very small. And I
Uh-huh.
think that they found them. I think there are some who got convicted in liberal jurisdictions who did not deserve, the law was not applied equally to everybody.
Mm.
And I had a problem with people who showed up in Kevlar vests and Kevlar helmets. But you're out of thousands of people, I think there were about 120 of those who showed up in that type of quote military gear. And I think most of them who got convicted do deserve a pardon because
Okay.
the law wasn't applied equally to everybody. And there are instances here. The problem here is that when Black Lives Matters protests happened, Nancy Pelosi, who's the custodian of the U.S. Capitol, she had 2,000 or 3,000 troops guarding the Capitol. And where were those troops on that day when she claimed in her testimony in Congress that she knew that that people were going to be violent that day? And as custodian of the U.S. Capitol, she has never taken responsibility for her role of leaving the Capitol vulnerable. Now, does that make the actions of those people right? No. But the number of people who were let's apply that to Black Lives Matter. There were more than 5,000 Black Lives Matter protests. And the talking point about Black Lives Matter is, listen, this wasn't a violent protest because about 10% were violent. We
Hmm.
had 500 violent protests in June of 2020 about Black Lives Matter. We had 100 American cities simultaneously on fire. The city of Minnesota lost hundreds of buildings, billions of dollars of damage. And nobody seems to care about that or prosecuting anyone, including the person, vice president and Democrat nominee, who set up a fund and helped raise money to bail people out of jail who were arrested. So there's completely a miscarriage of justice from our Department of Justice, from our federal custodians when it comes to applying the law equally to people who participated in January 6th and people who participated in Black Lives Matter.
Okay. I will just leave that there. Now, I should have asked you this question before when we were talking about the economy. So let me just switch back to that. Do you buy Trump's claims that imposing massive tariffs on imported goods would be good for the American people? Wouldn't that just result in higher costs for everything?
The devil's in the details on all that, right? And so I think there's a difference in both parties between political rhetoric and actions of the administration. And so I think, we have to wait and see what the proof is in the pudding with the actions of the administration. There's some who claim, and I don't know. I wasn't in those meetings. I wasn't behind closed doors. So I'm like you. I saw what I saw on television, and we try to read the tea leaves. And the one thing that I do know about Donald Trump is that he uses a lot of political rhetoric, and some of it he uses in his favor for negotiation purposes. Some he may actually mean. And so until actions are taken, I think that we just have to look, because I think part of what he's trying to do is put a line in the sand out there that we're no longer going to be taken advantage of with Chinese electric vehicles being made in Mexico and being forced down our throat. And, if you're going to do that, you're going to get tariffed on those vehicles, and you're not going to undercut American automakers who are giving jobs here to Americans.
You used electric vehicles made in China or parts of vehicles made in China and then produced in Mexico as an example there. But if he imposes a broad tariff the way he has described it way he described it in the campaign, it would force the cost of practically everything that's imported, from toys to groceries to technology, through the roof, would it not? And there we go with inflation back again.
I think what Donald Trump is going to weigh is the American people are hurting. They're hurting in this administration a lot due to energy policy. And I also think that there's a difference between economic policy and monetary policy. And Democrats seem to rely more on monetary policy and the adjustment of interest rates to guide economic policy instead of the other way around. And so I think this president, as he takes office, is going to look at what's best for the American people to ensure that they have the least expensive ways to get to work and of their choice, and reduce the price of food. And I think a lot of that will have to do with energy policy. And whether he imposes these tariffs or not, I don't think he does that without Congress. Now, it looks like Republicans are going to hold the House barely and take control of the U.S. Senate by a few votes. But the House, it looks like it's going to be about maybe 6 or 7 vote majority, not much more than what we saw in the last Congress. And so I think he's going to have to balance all of those interests of those politicians as well, and what they're hearing from their districts.
Okay. Trump is what, 78? And Biden was blasted because of his age, forced to step down as a result of his age. J.D. Vance is his pick, is his vice president elect. What are your thoughts about J.D. Vance and his readiness to be president should something happen to Trump?
This is an easy one. There's no question he's ready.
Okay. All right. Have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just appreciate you being on. I appreciate the discussion, and I'm glad we could play tennis here on some of these issues. And I think, if anything, I hope that you and I having this discussion while the embers of the fire of the campaign are still glowing a little hot,
Right.
and us be reasonable and friendly to each other, I hope that is something that we can continue as a society and not demagogue people who we disagree with. I appreciate your professionalism, and thank you for treating me kindly and fairly on this show. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I enjoyed talking to you, and I agree. I do believe that we need to tone down the rhetoric, and I'm giving some thought to even my own podcast and how it goes in the future. I don't
I
want to.
encourage people. I encourage people to be the loyal opposition. Our society is not based upon everybody going in the same direction and
That's right.
everybody agreeing on everything. And it's not wrong to have the argument. What's wrong is
No,
we look at our friends of 30 years and say, "I'm never speaking to you again because of who you're supporting." My wife is not political at all, and she put on Facebook. She goes, "I just don't understand. I would never end a friendship over somebody wanting pineapple and ham on their pizza when I want pepperoni." And she's just, I don't see much of a difference.
who would
And
put pineapple and ham on a pizza?
yeah, see, but you don't end a friendship over it. And so the number of people who have taken this so personally over the last 4 years, and just because you disagree or just because we have a different experience, which has, we all have different experiences. About one of the most inflammatory topics, abortion, I tell people I'm pro-life, and I'm pro-life for personal and emotional reasons. And I know that people who are on the other side are pro-choice for personal and emotional reasons.
Right.
And my personal and emotional reasons don't make me right and them wrong. And their personal and emotional reasons don't make them right and me wrong. It just makes our experiences different. And we all get a vote. And when it comes before us as a vote, they're going to vote that way. I'm going to vote this way. And it doesn't need to be hateful. It doesn't need to be, we don't need to demagogue each other for having these political differences. And it's not wrong to have the debate, but it's also, we do ourselves a disservice by not understanding the life experiences of those with whom we're debating.
Yeah.
And I think if we can start respecting each other and respecting that we all have different backgrounds and different life experiences that have brought us to this place where we disagree about this issue or that issue,
Right.
it helps us have a discussion where we can say, hey, can we meet in the middle and get this done?
Yeah. All right, Jamie, listen, that was well said, and I thank you for being with us today. I really do. I enjoyed the conversation a lot.
Me too.
And your description of it being a little bit of a tennis match, that was pretty good. Maybe we should say pickleball, though, because that's really good.
Pickleball's probably a little bit more my speed too. So.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gatty and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gatty is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at Lean to the Left 1, TikTok at Lean to the Left, LinkedIn at Bob Gatty, and YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gatty signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.